In the movie Under the Dome, a town wakes to find an invisible barrier sealing them in. No escape, no explanation. Life goes on, but nothing feels the same. We're living under domes too, not made of glass, but of space, silence, and control. Crowded trains where no one speaks. Public spaces that don't feel public. Homes with walls you can't always see. These are invisible walls, shaped by design, culture, and power. They tell us where we can go, how to act, and who belongs. This podcast explores how space makes us feel, how cities are edited in our minds, how architecture excludes, how protest redraws the map. Like the dome in the show, these walls change everything. Most of us just haven't noticed yet. You might think space is just space. A room is a room. A sidewalk is a sidewalk. But space is never just empty or neutral. It always carries meaning, even when we don't notice it. Where you sit in a meeting, how far you stand from a stranger, or whether you feel safe walking home at night, these are shaped by something more than floor plans. They're shaped by culture, memory, fear, and design. Walk into a waiting room. 2 chairs sit side by side. One is already taken. Do you sit in the one next to it, or do you leave a gap? In many places, people leave space. It's a silent rule, but that rule isn't the same everywhere. In some countries, closeness is normal. In others, it's a signal to back off. That small choice where you sit comes from what you've learned about space, and you've learned it from the world around you. Space also comes with emotion. Some places feel open, others feel tense. A narrow alley might raise your guard. A public square might feel lively or watched. These feelings aren't random. They come from how space is built and how it's used. Lighting, walls, sightlines, and sounds all change how a space feels. Add history, politics, or trauma, and the meaning grows deeper. A street where someone was arrested may look normal, but to some it carries weight. Design plays a big role. Architects decide where doors go, how paths flow, how much light enters a room, but their choices aren't just practical. They send messages. A low fence says something different than a high wall. A narrow corridor does something different than an open plaza. These choices shape who feels welcome and who doesn't. They shape how people move, pause, and leave. Sometimes the messages are clear. Other times they're quiet. A bench without armrests allows someone to lie down. A spike-covered surface doesn't. A public space with cameras might feel safe or watched. A polished office lobby may seem open, but isn't meant for lingering. We learn these things fast, even if we don't say them out loud. You're standing in a crowded elevator. The doors close. No one talks. Everyone faces forward, eyes down or fixed on the numbers. It feels like a small pause in the day, but your body knows the rules. Don't stare. Don't move too much. Keep your arms close. In these few seconds, you're managing space more than anything else. This kind of silent behavior isn't random. In the 1960s, anthropologist Edward Hall gave a name to the way we manage space between our bodies. He called it proxemics. He said we carry invisible zones with us, and each zone has its own purpose. Closest to us is the intimate zone. That's for people we trust deeply, partners, family, very close friends. Outside of that is the personal zone, used for casual conversations. Next is the social zone, used in workplaces or among acquaintances. Furthest out is the public zone, where strangers belong. These zones aren't fixed, but they guide how we feel about others being near us. When someone crosses into the wrong zone, even by accident, we feel it. Urban life complicates this. Crowded trains, packed sidewalks, busy cafes, all these places make it hard to keep our zones intact. But people adjust. We learn to protect our space in different ways. We avoid eye contact. We cross our arms. We wear headphones. These are small signals. They tell others, I'm here, but I'm not open. In cities, this kind of sensory withdrawal helps people cope. It creates a wall, not made of bricks, but of behavior. Now think about a subway car in rush hour. Every seat is taken. People stand shoulder to shoulder. Bags touch knees. Hands reach for overhead rails. It's full, but mostly quiet. There's a tension in the air. Everyone is doing the same thing, pulling inward. This is the invisible wall at work. It keeps the peace by keeping people separate, even when they're only inches apart. The size of these personal zones depends on where you are. In Japan, people accept tight spaces without complaint. A full train doesn't lead to arguments or loud voices. There's a social agreement to be quiet and still. It helps everyone get through the ride. In Brazil, on the other hand, People might stand closer during conversation, even among strangers. Touch on the arm or shoulder may be common. That's not about rudeness. It's just a different map of what's normal. Culture sets the baseline for these invisible rules. What feels too close in one country might feel distant in another. A study in Hong Kong explored how people manage space in one of the busiest subway systems in the world. Researchers Zhao and Xu looked closely at how people move through stations, ride trains, and use public space inside the system. They found that people naturally followed invisible boundaries. For example, on escalators, most people stood to one side and left the other side open for walking. They didn't need signs. It was a shared habit. On platforms, passengers lined up behind yellow safety lines without being told. In carriages, people avoided making noise, even when the train was packed. These actions created order where physical space was limited. The researchers also noticed that people don't just follow space, they shape it. Some passengers leaned on poles in ways that made it hard for others to hold on. Others set down bags in empty spots to claim space. Elderly women collecting recyclables often used corners of stations to sort items, creating personal work zones. These were not official uses of space, but they became part of the environment. The line between designed space and lived space blurred. This behavior showed something important. People are not just passive users. They adapt space to their needs. Sometimes they follow the rules. Sometimes they bend them. Sometimes they make their own. This tension between order and adaptation appears everywhere. In a train station, you might see a group sitting on the floor, using a corner to wait or rest. Technically, that space wasn't meant for sitting, but the group claims it for a while. Others pass by and adjust. That's how space evolves in real time. These small decisions create the moving boundary lines that shape shared environments. In most public spaces, people fall into one of two roles: passive or dominant. Passive users accept the rules and adjust themselves to fit. They stand in line, they keep quiet, they stay out of the way. Dominant users reshape the space. They talk loudly, they take up more room. They move with confidence, often without noticing how they affect others. Dominant doesn't always mean aggressive. It can be subtle. Someone spreading their coat across a seat is doing it. Someone holding a loud phone call is doing it. Dominant users stretch the boundary of what's acceptable. These roles shift depending on place, time, and identity. A person might be passive in a formal office, but dominant on a neighborhood street. Power matters too. People with more confidence or privilege often take more space without thinking about it. Those with less power may shrink themselves to avoid trouble. Understanding these everyday walls helps us notice how space works beneath the surface. When you see someone standing alone at a bus stop, choosing a spot slightly apart from others, that's not just personal taste, it's spatial negotiation. When two people avoid sitting next to each other in an empty cafe, they're following the silent lines of proxemics. When someone enters a train and stands in the doorway, blocking others, they're changing the flow of movement with their body. None of this is random. Space may look open, but our behavior turns it into a map, one with invisible borders, quiet rules, and shifting zones. Every day we follow them. Every now and then we break them. Either way, we live within the wall. You don't walk through a city the same way every time. You might take a shortcut one day, a scenic route the next, but your choices aren't just based on time or distance. They're shaped by something deeper, what you've seen, what you've felt, and what you're trying to avoid. Over time, you build a mental version of the city. Some places stay clear in your mind. Others fade or get erased. This mental editing is not random. It comes from experience, emotion, and memory. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman once described how people carry mental maps of their surroundings. These maps don't follow official borders or street names. They follow feelings. They reflect where you feel safe, where you feel out of place, where you feel seen or ignored. Bauman gave an example of a tour guide who never pointed out the nearby slums. They didn't exist on his version of the city. He didn't lie. He just left them out. His mental map had gaps. We all do this. We skip streets where we once felt threatened. We avoid buildings tied to bad memories. We erase these places from our daily routes. They vanish from the map, even if they're still standing. Writer Olga Tokarczuk speaks about this kind of erasure in a more personal way. In her fiction, characters often avoid entire sections of a city after something painful happens there. She doesn't treat space as a blank background. She treats it as something that holds the past. If a character walks down a certain street, they carry every memory tied to that walk. If the memory is too heavy, they find another way. This is not just storytelling. It reflects how people actually move. We respond to the emotional weight of places. We steer away from harm, even if the danger is gone. Some geographers call this idea hodological space. It means we don't always take the shortest route between 2 points. We take the route that feels right. That could mean safer, quieter, more familiar. Two people might leave the same building and head to the same store, but their paths will differ based on who they are. A teenager might cut through a park. A woman walking alone at night might take a longer path along a well-lit road. These aren't just habits, they're acts of care and survival. Now think about Rio de Janeiro. On most tourist maps, the slums or favelas don't appear. The city presents itself with beaches, landmarks, and shopping districts, but favelas are home to millions. These areas are full of daily life, yet they often vanish from formal images of the city. This isn't just about cartography, it's about how people in power choose what gets seen. When a place doesn't appear on a map, it doesn't disappear in real life. But its absence sends a message. This space doesn't matter to us. Its people don't count. Residents of favelas know this. Many say the state only appears during conflict, police raids, military presence, emergency actions. Services like trash pickup, postal delivery, or reliable transport are weak or missing. When the state is absent or only present in force, it shapes how people view themselves and their surroundings. Over time, this leads to psychological distance. The favela becomes a separate world, not just to outsiders, but to those who live inside it. Some residents form tight internal maps focused on local shops, homes, and allies, but rarely travel beyond their zone. It's not just a lack of resources, it's the result of long-term exclusion. This gap in recognition has real effects. People feel cut off. When the rest of the city acts like you don't exist, it changes how you move, how you speak, how you use space. Even children grow up learning that some areas are not for them. They carry that knowledge in their bodies. It shapes their posture, their choices, their futures. Emotional geography is the term some researchers use to describe this. It's about how space carries feeling and how feeling changes space. A neighborhood is not just a grid of streets. It's joy, grief, fear, pride, all mapped onto real places. A park might remind someone of childhood safety. A storefront might trigger a memory of violence. We move through these layers whether we think about them or not. Trauma leaves its mark. A building where violence happened may look unchanged, but it doesn't feel the same. People avoid it, even if they don't speak about it. Over time, whole areas can carry this weight. When enough people associate a place with danger or loss, it becomes hard to reclaim it. The physical space stays, but the emotional map shifts. In some cities, officials try to erase this weight with new design. They build monuments, paint murals, rename streets. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. You can't remove memory by changing the sign. People still feel what they felt. They still avoid what they fear. Design can guide movement, but it can't undo emotional history. That takes time. It takes trust. It takes a shift in who gets to shape the map. We often think of maps as objective, but they're made by people with power. They show what those people care about. If something doesn't appear, whether a slum, a protest site, or a shelter, it's a choice. Mental maps work the same way. We build them based on what we notice, what we avoid, and what we can't forget. Your version of a city isn't mine. Maybe you avoid the underpass where your wallet was stolen. Maybe you go out of your way to pass a church you like. Maybe there's a plaza you only visit during the day. These choices shape your daily path. They also shape your sense of the city. What feels close, what feels far, what feels possible, these things change depending on what your body remembers. When we talk about invisible walls, this is one of the most common forms. A place exists, but we treat it like it doesn't. Or we see it, but we only walk past it. We don't enter. We don't look around. We move with care or with fear. Our minds draw lines around it and mark it. Do not cross. This is how space becomes uneven, even when it looks open. And this is how trauma, habit, and exclusion get built into the everyday routes we take without thinking. Not all walls are built. Some are remembered, some are inherited, some are made from silence. But once they exist, they shape how people live and where they believe they're allowed to go. You walk into a gallery and see a figure. It stands alone. It's made of cast iron, shaped like a human but without detail. It faces forward. There's no face, no pose, no story. But somehow, it holds your attention. That's what Antony Gormley wants. He makes sculptures that use the body not to express beauty or action, but to hold space. His work suggests that our bodies are not just things we move around in. They are containers. They carry memory, fear, pressure, and presence. When you see one of his figures placed in an empty field or on a rooftop, you don't just look at the sculpture. You look at how it changes the space around it. Gormley's figures don't act. They receive. They stand still and let the world move around them. He places them in isolated locations, on a beach during low tide, scattered across a rooftop, or lined up in a gallery. In each case, the work is less about the object and more about how it feels to stand in front of it. There is no wall, no rope, no sound, but the space feels charged. The body, his, yours, the sculpture's, starts to feel like a boundary in itself. Duhosu takes a different approach. He doesn't use the body as the main subject. Instead, he recreates the spaces bodies move through. He sews translucent fabric to form life-sized versions of hallways, stairwells, doors, and apartments. These aren't random spaces. They're the actual homes he has lived in, places in Korea, London, New York. When you walk through them, you see seams, outlines, small objects stitched into walls. There are no hard edges. Everything is soft, see-through, and precise. It feels like walking through a memory. Su's work is not nostalgic in the usual sense. He doesn't add decoration or sentiment. He presents the space just as it was, narrow, simple, specific. The material he uses, often polyester, is light but strong. It holds its shape but lets light through. When people walk through his installations, they don't just see space. They feel what it means to pass from one life to another. A hallway becomes a threshold. A door becomes a question. What do we take with us when we move? What stays behind? Alberto Greco took the idea of boundaries and made it literal. In the early 1960s, he walked into public spaces, found people standing or sitting, and drew circles around them with chalk. He called this act vivo dito, or living finger. He treated the people inside the circle as living sculptures. Sometimes they were strangers. Sometimes they didn't even notice what he was doing. Once circled, the person became part of the work. Greco was asking something simple but sharp. Who defines space? Who gets to say where art begins and ends? The chalk circle was temporary. It faded or got walked over. But in that moment, it changed the meaning of what was inside. People watching became aware of the space around the person. They saw a frame where none existed before. That's what invisible walls do in daily life. They separate us in ways we don't always see until someone points them out. Doug Aitken's work steps into the digital world. His art often combines film, sound, sculpture, and architecture. He explores how technology changes our sense of space. One of his well-known pieces is Station to Station, a traveling project that used a train as a moving studio and gallery. It crossed the U.S., stopping in cities to host events. But even more than the physical train, Aitken focused on how people stay connected when they're apart. His work asks, if we're always linked by screens, messages, and streams, what happens to physical space? In other installations, Aitken uses mirrors, light, and repetition to create disorientation. A room may reflect itself endlessly. A voice may echo across surfaces. These effects don't just dazzle, they unsettle. They show how easy it is to lose track of where you are. In a world full of digital interaction, the boundaries between places blur. A video call feels like presence, even when bodies are far apart. Aitken doesn't argue for or against this shift. He simply lays it out and lets you feel it. What all these artists share is a focus on space, not as background, but as subject. Gormley's figures hold it. Su's fabric homes recreate it. Greco draws lines inside it. Aitken scrambles it. Each of them shows that space is not empty. It's shaped by movement, history, power, and presence. In their work, invisible barriers become visible. You see the edge where personal space starts. You feel the boundary between home and elsewhere. You notice how your body reacts in different settings. These reactions aren't abstract, they are physical and immediate. Art doesn't solve the problem of invisible walls, but it helps us notice them. A sculpture that stands too still, a hallway made of cloth, a circle drawn in chalk, these gestures stop us. They make us ask, what am I walking through? Who else has walked here? What rules am I following without even knowing it? Artists often work in silence, but their pieces speak to everyday acts, sitting in a public space, waiting in a hallway, moving through a crowd. These aren't just actions, they're negotiations with space and with others. Art helps bring those negotiations into the open. When you walk through a museum or through a city, these questions travel with you. You begin to notice how far you stand from someone else. You see who takes up more space and who gets pushed to the edge. You realize that what seems open may actually be closed. What seems neutral may carry weight. The artist doesn't always explain, but the work gives you a way to see. It lets the wall appear, if only for a moment. Walk through a housing estate in Camden, and you'll notice something unusual. The buildings don't form long blocks. They step back, shift levels, open up at corners. The paths curve. Small balconies look out over walkways. You see stairs, not lifts. You see children playing, someone watering plants, an open door left ajar. This was intentional. Architect Neve Brown didn't just want to build homes. He wanted to design space that created relationships between neighbors, between private life and public life. His work in Camden, especially the Alexandra Road estate, built in the 1970s, offers a clear example of how architecture can shape invisible boundaries. In these designs, Brown drew a careful line between what was public, what was private, and what was somewhere in between. He didn't just build walls and roofs. He mapped zones of daily life. A front step, where you might chat with a neighbor, is semi-private. A raised walkway, where people pass each other on foot, is semi-public. A courtyard with benches and trees invites quiet gathering. These layers create a rhythm. You can be alone without being isolated. You can be together without losing privacy. This balance relies on architecture that understands people as part of the plan. Now compare this with another experiment, Highgate New Town, built not far away. This project took cues from ideas developed by writer and activist Jane Jacobs. Jacobs argued that streets become safer when people use them, when windows look onto sidewalks, and when buildings support informal social checks. Her phrase, eyes on the street, wasn't about surveillance, it was about trust. When neighbors know each other, they notice things. When streets feel watched, they feel safe. At Highgate, architects tried to apply this idea. They designed flats with front doors that opened directly onto walkways. But the outcome was mixed. The walkways didn't always attract regular use. Some felt too narrow or too exposed. In places where people didn't claim the space, it started to feel neglected. Jacobs believed good public space needs to be busy, varied, and used throughout the day. Without that steady presence, even well-meaning design can fall flat. Between buildings and borders, cities also hold dead zones. These are places that look like open space, but act like walls. Council estates, especially those built in the mid-20th century, often ended up boxed in by railways, highways, or industrial land. These areas became known as buffer zones. They don't serve a strong purpose, but they stretch the space between two places. They make things feel farther apart. A 5-minute walk becomes a 10-minute detour. These gaps aren't just physical, they add psychological weight. They mark who is inside and who is outside. Railways are a common example. They cut through neighborhoods with no crossings, no underpasses, no paths. On one side, you might find shops, schools, traffic. On the other, silence. The line becomes more than a track, it becomes a boundary. It shapes perception. One side is lively, the other feels left behind. These impressions stick, even if the distance is short. The same idea plays out on a larger, more visible scale with the Israeli West Bank barrier. Built from 2002 onward, the wall runs for hundreds of kilometers, made of concrete slabs, fences, checkpoints, and patrol roads. On paper, it is a security structure. In practice, it cuts through towns, farmlands, and families. It creates a line of control that is both hard and soft. Hard because it stops movement. Soft because it shapes identity. People on either side live with the wall as part of daily life. For Palestinians, it restricts access to work, healthcare, and relatives. Some villages lie on the wrong side of the wall and require permits just to visit nearby towns. For Israelis, it offers a sense of separation from conflict, but also reduces visibility. What's beyond the wall becomes out of sight and eventually out of mind. This isn't just a military decision, it's a spatial one. The route of the wall often cuts into Palestinian land. It doesn't follow the official border. This shapes who has access to what. Fields, wells, and roads fall on different sides. The wall is not just a barrier, it's a remapping of space that changes rights and possibilities. Walls like these tell people where they are allowed to go, but more than that, they tell people who they are. A design decision, where to place a gate, how high to build a fence, what kind of path to lay, sends a message. It can invite or exclude. It can make someone feel seen or invisible. Public architecture carries this power even when it looks neutral. A bench with armrests might seem like a comfort, but it can also prevent someone from lying down. A gate might add safety, but it might also signal that others are not welcome. Fences, signage, pavement width, each plays a role in shaping behavior. Design becomes a quiet form of control. It doesn't always stop people with force, but it directs them. It pushes them in certain directions, or discourages them from staying too long. A well-lit plaza with food trucks and seating invites leisure. A cold concrete square with no shade or shelter encourages people to move on. In every case, the decisions seem small, but together they build a map of who belongs. In new developments, especially in global cities, private companies often manage what looks like public space. A shopping plaza might have a security guard, private rules, and hidden cameras. You might not notice it, but you'll feel it if you sit too long, speak too loudly, or gather in a group. The space says you're welcome, but only if you follow the script. The Camden example shows how design can soften these lines. It gives people space to be alone, but not isolated. It allows a child to play while a neighbor keeps watch. It supports casual contact, small moments that build community. The goal isn't control, it's support. It's the idea that architecture can serve as a guide rather than a gate. But elsewhere, and often, design draws sharper lines. It protects property, controls movement, and defines who gets to feel comfortable. The wall may be made of stone or steel, or it may be nothing more than a path too narrow to share. Either way, someone is on the inside, someone else is not. That line may be hard to see, but it is felt. Every day, you step into a wide, open square. There's a fountain in the center, some benches, polished paving stones, and clean landscaping. Music plays softly through speakers. A few people sit, drink coffee, and scroll their phones. It feels relaxed. It looks public. But look closer, and things change. A small sign says no bikes. A security guard stands by the entrance. You try to hand out flyers, and someone tells you to stop. You ask about holding a small protest, and you're told that's not allowed. You're in a space that looks public but isn't. It's private property made to feel open. Across many cities, these kinds of spaces are growing. Developers create open squares, walkways, and parks inside large retail or office projects. They often include art, trees, seating, and signs that suggest welcome. But the rules come from private owners, not public law. This means the rights people expect in a public space, free speech, protest, assembly, don't apply in the same way. People don't always know this. They assume the space works like any other park or plaza. But when conflict or tension arises, the difference becomes clear. In Poland, this tension has played out in visible ways. Researchers studied 3 urban squares: Szczepański Square, which is fully public, Nowak Jeziorański Square, which is semi-public and privately managed, and Women Textile Workers Square in Łódź, which is fully private. All 3 feel similar on the surface. People gather, talk, rest, and pass through. But when asked what they're allowed to do there, most people couldn't tell the difference. They believed they had the same civil rights in all 3 spaces. They didn't know which were privately owned. They didn't know that in some of them, they could be removed for reasons that wouldn't hold up in public space. People were asked whether they could pray, protest, or give a political speech in each square. Many assumed they could. In reality, private owners often ban such activities. These are legal restrictions, not just informal rules. In one square, a small group tried to organize a public vigil. They were stopped by security. They had no legal right to be there for that purpose. The space was private, and the owners wanted to avoid conflict or disruption. Even quiet, respectful actions were not allowed. This raises a deeper problem. When a space feels public but is not, people expect rights they don't actually have. And when those rights are denied, there's little they can do. The boundary is invisible until challenged. This creates confusion and weakens public life. Spaces that look democratic are controlled in ways that limit free expression. That control is often subtle. It comes through signs, sound, lighting, and security, not through violence, but through design. Surveillance plays a key role. In these privatized squares, security cameras are common. Guards often stand nearby, watching without interfering, until someone breaks a rule. The effect is not always aggressive. In fact, many people say they feel safe in these areas. They enjoy the order, the cleanliness, the sense of comfort, but comfort comes with cost. People adjust their behavior. They speak more softly. They keep their visits short. They move through space with the quiet sense of being watched. This is called behavioral conditioning. It's not just about punishment. It's about learning the rules through repetition and small feedback. When you stand in the wrong place and someone asks you to move, you remember. When you try to do something unusual and it's not allowed, you don't try again. Over time, people avoid anything that might draw attention. This shapes what kind of life happens in the square. It becomes a place for walking, sitting, and spending money, not for debate, performance, or shared political life. Legally, this model works because private owners have the right to control access and use. In a private square, you are a guest. You don't have the same protections as you do on a public street. This is not always visible. There may be no clear sign saying who owns the space. Even when signs exist, people may not read them. Ownership stays in the background. What matters is how it works. Ethically, the question is more complex. Should a space that looks public follow public rules? Should people be told clearly what rights they give up when they enter? Should cities allow developers to replace public plazas with managed private ones? These are not abstract questions. They affect daily life. In many cases, cities welcome privatized squares because they bring money, foot traffic, and maintenance. A developer agrees to create open space in exchange for zoning or tax benefits. The result is a clean, attractive place that looks good on paper. But when something happens, a protest, a vigil, a spontaneous performance, the limits appear. City officials often say they have no authority there. The space is not theirs to govern. This creates a blind spot. A space that looks shared has no shared accountability. In Wuj, Women Textile Workers Square sits in a popular commercial area. It has shops, benches, trees, and art. People enjoy spending time there, but the space is entirely private. The company that owns it sets the rules. When asked, most people believed it was public. They felt relaxed and open until the rules were enforced. Then they were surprised. They realized they had assumed too much. Their rights were not protected as they thought. This shows how the line between public and private has blurred. The square has become a stage. It looks democratic. It invites you in, but it asks you to follow a script. It welcomes you as long as you do what's expected. Sit, drink, shop, move on. No signs, no speeches, no change. People often say they don't notice the cameras or the security. They say the space feels safe. This is not a mistake. It's part of the design. Comfort is a tool. It encourages people to come. But that comfort depends on limits, on avoiding friction, avoiding conflict, avoiding anything that might make others uncomfortable. The risk is that people stop expecting anything more. If every new square is privately managed and every protest is moved somewhere else, people lose practice in using public space for civic life. The idea of public space shrinks. It becomes a zone for rest, not resistance. A place for watching, not speaking. The challenge is not just legal or physical. It's about expectations. What do people think they can do in a city? What do they believe is allowed? When space looks open but acts closed, it confuses those beliefs. And when that happens often enough, people begin to change their behavior even in truly public spaces. They stop trying. They assume they can't. And slowly, without a fight, the city becomes quieter, more controlled, and less free. A man enters a crowded train. Most seats are taken. One is empty, but a bag sits on it. He doesn't ask anyone to move it. He just lifts the bag, sits down, and places the bag on his lap. Around him, people glance over. No one speaks. But something has shifted. He's broken a small, silent rule. Don't touch someone else's belongings. But the seat wasn't claimed. He saw a right and acted. This is a form of everyday resistance. Not loud, not aggressive, but still a challenge to how space is used and who controls it. Cities are full of these small acts. Street vendors set up stalls in spaces never meant for commerce, beneath stairwells, at train station exits, along overpasses. They don't wait for approval. They use what they have: a foldable table, a mat, a small cart. In doing so, they redraw the map. A walkway becomes a market. A corner becomes a kitchen. These aren't accidents. They're acts of survival and skill. Vendors know where to stand, when to move, and how to respond when challenged. Over time, they create their own system. Space gets re-territorialized, taken from its planned use and shaped into something new. These shifts don't always last. Authorities remove stalls, guards clear platforms. But the change has already happened. Space was claimed, if only briefly, and the memory of that claim stays. Others notice. They may try the same. These small acts build a pattern. Together, they challenge the idea that space is neutral or fixed. Public protest takes this further. When people gather to protest, they do more than hold signs. They disrupt space. They refuse to move. They speak where silence is expected. They turn paths into blockades. They sleep in plazas meant for passing through. In doing this, they change what a place means. Tahrir Square in Cairo was never designed for protest. It's a large roundabout surrounded by roads and government buildings. People cross it, but they don't stay. In early 2011, that changed. Protesters came in waves. They gathered in the square to demand political change. At first, they stood. Then they sat. Then they camped. Tents went up. Food was shared. Clinics were formed. The square became a village. This wasn't planned. People brought what they could. Some laid down mats. Others built shelters from plastic sheets. Protesters created their own media stations and made signs from cardboard and tape. They used the shape of the square to form barriers and to keep sightlines open. The center held the largest crowd. Edges were for sleeping, cooking, and organizing. People who had never met formed a system. The power of this action was not just in the message, but in the space itself. By staying, by refusing to leave, protesters changed the square from a traffic circle into a symbol. It became a site of struggle and hope. And even after the protests ended, people remembered it differently. The physical features didn't change, but the meaning had. Hong Kong's umbrella movement followed a similar path, though the city looked very different. In 2014, thousands of students and activists occupied key roads in the business district. Their protest began with a call for fair elections. It quickly became about visibility and presence. Protesters used umbrellas not just for rain, but for protection against tear gas. The umbrella became a symbol, but more than that, the protest changed how public space worked. The protesters didn't just stand in one place. They built structures. They used tents, cardboard, and tarps to create zones. One area held supplies. Another had a study corner. There were areas for food, medical aid, and legal support. Walkways became conversation spaces. Barricades marked the edges, made from plastic pallets and street fencing. Every item had a purpose. Every corner carried meaning. People slept on footpaths usually used for walking. They wrote on the streets with chalk. They painted slogans on stairwells. They handed out leaflets, gave speeches, and held open forums. These weren't disruptions for the sake of chaos. They were reorganizations. Protesters weren't just asking for change. They were showing what a different kind of civic space might look like, one shaped by participation, not control. Authorities eventually cleared the areas. Streets reopened. Tents were removed. But as in Cairo, the trace of the occupation remained. The act of using space differently left a mark. It showed that planned uses can be challenged, that public space doesn't belong only to officials, businesses, or designers. It belongs to those who use it. In both cases, the protests were not only political acts, but spatial ones. They disrupted the invisible order of cities, the expectation that people move, consume, and stay quiet. By staying put, protesters broke that rhythm. They made space slow down. They forced people to notice. Resistance can be temporary. A market stall may disappear at the end of the day. A protest camp may last weeks, not months. But the point is not permanence. The point is possibility. These actions show that the rules of space can be rewritten, even if only for a time. Not all resistance looks like protest. Sometimes it looks like a person sitting too long on a bench marked for short-term use. Sometimes it's someone using a mall as shelter during cold weather. Sometimes it's a group of teenagers skating in a space marked no loitering. These acts often meet pushback. Guards may intervene, cameras may record, rules may be enforced. But each action asks a quiet question: who decides how we use space? Space is never just physical. It carries rules, written and unwritten. It holds expectations. People who resist those expectations aren't always trying to make a statement. Sometimes they just need a place to be. But even then, their presence changes the meaning of the space around them. When a person sits where no one else dares to, when a group stays in a place built for passing through, when someone uses space in a way that feels out of place, they make the invisible visible. They show the lines others follow without seeing. And for a moment, they redraw the map. Walk through a city, and you'll pass through many types of space. Some feel wide open. Some feel closed off. Others are somewhere in between. These feelings don't come from chance. They come from design. Designers shape how we move, what we see, and what we feel. They do this through visible elements like walls and paths, and through less obvious choices, sight lines, materials, noise levels, even where a bench is placed. Space tells us how to behave. It tells us who belongs and who doesn't. Researchers Zhao and Xu studied this in the context of Hong Kong's MTR system. They looked at how boundaries in public transport stations guide people. Some boundaries were clear: ticket gates, fences, escalators. Others were invisible: social rules about where to stand, when to move, how to wait. They developed a framework to help understand these boundaries. They named 5 types based on how open or closed they felt. Freestyle: boundaries had no real limit, like open hallways. Unclosed had small cues, like markings on the floor. Meshy allowed movement but hinted at division, like waist-high railings. Semi-closed created stronger separation. Full closed physically blocked access. Each type served a purpose. Some helped with flow, guiding people from one area to another. Others controlled access or offered privacy. But not all boundaries worked well. Zhao and Xu pointed out that good design doesn't just depend on how a space looks. It depends on how people experience it. When design aligns with how people think and feel, the space works. When it doesn't, people feel confused or uneasy. This is where empathy matters. Good design considers not only movement, but comfort. That comfort isn't always about softness or silence. It's about knowing where you are, what's expected, and what choices you have. A waiting room that makes it clear where to sit without feeling like a trap offers comfort. A hallway with good lighting and visible exits does the same. These choices are small but powerful. Psychological comfort also means understanding fear and stress. A wide staircase with no handrail might work fine for some, but it may feel dangerous to others. A public square with no shade or seating might look beautiful, but it doesn't invite people to stay. Designers need to consider how people read space, not just how they move through it. This becomes more urgent when thinking about access. A person in a wheelchair doesn't just need ramps. They need space to turn. They need smooth surfaces and reachable buttons. They need public bathrooms that truly fit. These are not extras. They're basic needs. When they're missing, it sends a message: this space is not for you. Neurodivergent people may face different challenges. Bright lights, loud sounds, unclear signage, and crowded layouts can make public space hard to use. Design that supports them might include quiet zones, soft lighting, clear paths, or simple maps. These features help everyone, not just those who need them most. When space feels predictable and safe, more people can take part in public life. Copenhagen's Superkilen Park offers a strong example of inclusive, human-centered design. Located in the Nørrebro district, it was built to reflect the area's diverse population. Instead of designing from the top down, the planners asked local residents what they wanted. People from over 60 nationalities contributed. The result was a park filled with objects from around the world: a Thai boxing ring, a Moroccan fountain, a Russian bus stop, swings from India. Each item came with a story. Each one represented a link to home. The park is divided into 3 zones. The red square has sports facilities and open space for events. The black market includes benches and gathering areas. The green park offers trees, picnic spots, and play areas. Each zone supports different types of use: movement, rest, socializing. The design avoids clutter and keeps sightlines open. Paths curve but remain clear. Materials are durable and safe. There are ramps, wide walkways, and varied seating. Superkylan doesn't flatten cultural difference. It puts it on display. It treats visibility as a form of care. It invites people to see each other, not through slogans, but through objects, textures, and color. The park isn't perfect, but it shows how design can support inclusion without becoming generic. It uses space to say, "You're here," and that matters. Design always carries meaning. A glass wall says something different than a brick one. A narrow alley without lighting says something different than a wide, open street. When design choices aren't explained, they still communicate. That's why invisible boundaries aren't neutral. They guide behavior, set limits, and send signals about power. A staircase that leads nowhere makes people feel lost. A bench with no backrest discourages rest. A sign that lists 10 rules before you enter a park says, "Be careful." These are not just features. They are part of a script. They shape how people act and how they see each other. Sometimes that script pushes people out. A plaza with no public restrooms becomes hard to use. A building with no shelter at the entrance becomes hostile during bad weather. A cafe with narrow doorways keeps out strollers and wheelchairs. These barriers aren't always built on purpose, but they still exclude. They tell people you are not the user we imagined. Design can also hide limits. A square might look open but include rules that ban protests. A shopping street may look public but belong to private owners. The surface appears inviting. The reality is controlled. In these cases, empathy means more than comfort. It means honesty. People should know where they are and what they can do. Signs should be clear. Rules should be fair. Space should not mislead. To design with empathy is not to please everyone. It's to notice needs that are often ignored. It's to test how space feels to different bodies at different times in different conditions. It's to ask, who is this for? Who might struggle here? What helps someone feel safe, seen, or in control? When designers ask these questions, they shift the focus from control to care. They treat boundaries not as barriers, but as choices. Choices that affect how people feel, how they move, and whether they return. In doing so, they create space that listens and space that responds. At home, the walls you can touch are not the only ones that matter. Every home has invisible boundaries, rules about where people can go, what they can say, and how they can behave. These boundaries form over time, often without words. They reflect power, memory, and routine. A room may be open to everyone, but still feel like someone else's territory. A hallway may be short, but still feel like a line that shouldn't be crossed. These lines often appear through gender roles. In some households, the kitchen is a woman's space. In others, a man may claim the TV room. These claims may not be spoken. They're built through repetition. One person cooks, another sits. One person tidies, another stretches out and relaxes. These routines create zones of influence. They tell people where they belong and what they should do. Children learn them early. A father's study may be off limits. A mother's bedroom may be the quietest place in the house. Over time, these lines grow stronger. They turn into rules: who knocks, who walks in, who stays out. Generational roles add another layer. In multi-generational homes, older family members may control shared areas. Their presence shapes behavior. A grandparent in the living room changes what kind of noise is acceptable. A parent at the kitchen table may make a teenager avoid that space altogether. These adjustments aren't always made with conflict. They often happen quietly. One person enters, pauses, then turns and leaves. Space has spoken. In shared apartments, the division is often more direct. Each tenant claims a bedroom. Shared areas like kitchens or bathrooms become negotiation zones. Who cleans? Who leaves dishes? Who controls the light, the noise, the air? These are not small details. They decide whether a space feels calm or tense. A shared flat with no clear boundaries can become stressful fast. People avoid each other. They cook at odd hours. They disappear into their rooms. The flat becomes a set of small private zones with narrow paths in between. Open-plan homes are often seen as a fix for this. Without walls, the idea is that people connect more easily. They share space, time, and activity. But this openness can bring problems. Noise carries, smells spread, people feel watched. There's no clear place to retreat. In theory, open plans build unity. In practice, they can expose friction. Someone wants to read while someone else watches TV. Someone wants quiet while another takes a call. Without doors, compromise becomes the only boundary. That can lead to fatigue. Even in small homes, people carve out space. A child builds a fort in the corner. A teen uses headphones to create privacy. A parent wakes early to have the kitchen alone. These aren't just habits. They're signs that the body seeks its own space. We don't just live together, we live around each other. Boundaries, even soft ones, help us stay connected without conflict. Tokyo's micro-apartments offer a clear view of how much people can adapt. Many of these homes are under 150 square feet. They may include a bed, a shower, a toilet, a small desk, and not much else. There's often no full kitchen. Some don't have closets. The walls are thin. The ceilings are low. But for many, these spaces are a refuge. Rent is lower than average. Privacy is guaranteed. In a city that can feel overwhelming, the apartment becomes a personal retreat. People who live in these units often speak of a sense of control. They can choose when to come home, when to leave, and what to do inside. They may not entertain guests, but they protect their solitude. The small space forces clarity. Every object has a place. Every action has a rhythm. There's no room for clutter, but also no room for pressure. You are alone, and that becomes a form of freedom. At the same time, these spaces can also feel isolating. Some tenants describe a sense of detachment. They go from work to home and back without much contact. The space becomes a shell. It holds them, but doesn't connect them. This contrast shows how walls can protect or divide. The same door that gives you peace can also cut you off. Inside families, emotional boundaries are just as powerful. A parent might sit in silence at the table, and the whole room shifts. A sibling might take over the living room each night, and no one challenges them. These patterns form through emotion, not layout. They create zones where tension builds or where people walk on edge. You can measure these boundaries not in feet or meters, but in feeling. Walls help shape these feelings. A room with a door gives more than privacy. It gives choice. You can open or close it. You can ask for space or offer it. Without that option, people find other ways. They might turn their back, put on headphones, or leave the house. Each action redraws the map. Each signal says, "This is my line." Designers often focus on physical space, but homes also need space for the mind. That means allowing people to shift between togetherness and solitude. It means making space flexible enough to change through the day. A table used for dinner might also hold homework. A sofa used for guests might later become a quiet corner. These changes don't need big rooms. They need soft edges. They need an understanding of rhythm, habit, and mood. Invisible walls aren't always bad. They help people share space without losing themselves. But when they become too rigid, or when they form from fear, anger, or silence, they stop serving anyone. A child who avoids the kitchen, a spouse who stays in the garage, a roommate who only speaks by text. These are signs that boundaries have hardened into walls. You don't always need to move the furniture to change a space. Sometimes listening is enough. A home isn't just what you build, it's how you move inside it, and how you let others move too. Look around the room you're in. Maybe you're alone, maybe someone else is nearby. You might feel at ease, you might feel alert. Either way, something shapes how you sit, where you look, how close you let someone come. That something isn't always visible. It's not just the walls or the furniture, it's the quiet rules and habits that define the space around you. These rules form over time, but they aren't fixed. They can change, and once you notice them, you start to see space differently. Living with awareness of these invisible walls means paying attention to how space affects behavior. It means asking simple questions. Who gets to sit here? Who avoids this area? What kind of movement feels allowed? And what feels out of place? In a park, that might mean noticing which benches stay empty. On a train, it might mean watching how people shift away from each other. At home, it might mean seeing how someone's silence reshapes the kitchen. These walls don't always need to be broken, but they can be softened. A softened boundary invites people in without forcing them to cross a line. That might look like shared seating that allows both closeness and space. It might be a path that curves instead of cutting straight through. It might be a room with movable furniture that can adapt to the moment rather than locking people into roles. Reclaiming public space starts with the same idea. You don't have to hold a sign or raise your voice to shift how space works. Sometimes it's enough to pause, to sit longer than expected, to use a square for something quiet but new. Other times, it means gathering, bringing people together not to disrupt, but to show that presence itself can be powerful. When space feels controlled, stillness can be a form of resistance. When space feels empty, attention can bring it to life. Design can support this shift. It can give people options instead of commands. Instead of dividing space into fixed zones, design can allow overlap. A plaza can welcome rest and movement at the same time. A bench can fit one person or two without sending a message either way. Lighting can create safety without glare. Signage can clarify rights instead of just listing rules. These are not large changes, but they shape how people feel. Once you begin to notice these choices, you see them everywhere. In doorways, in stairwells, in the places people stop, and the places they rush past. You see how bodies move when they feel safe, and how they shrink when they don't. You see how silence can fill a room with tension or ease. The wall you feel may not be yours. You may have walked into it. You may carry it with you. But once you see it, you can choose how to respond. Maybe you step around it. Maybe you open it a little. Maybe for someone else, you help take it down.